Well, hello, writers. Welcome to episode number 224 of How Do You Write? I'm Rachael Herron, and I'm so pleased that you are with me here today to talk to Abigail Dean. Y'all, this book rocked my world. This was such a great book. And it was so dark, and it got me really excited about reading dark again. 2020 kind of took a little bit of the glow off of darkness. Is that a thing? I'm not even going to re-record this because you understand what I mean. Like, I didn't really want to read that dark in 2020, but I tell you what, 2021 looking a tiny bit brighter, the tiniest, and I'm back into reading dark thrillers. So I will speak to what's been going on around here for just a second, and then I want to go back to talking about Abigail Dean before we start talking to her. So, personal update around here. I'm just chugging along. It feels really, really great, as I have said multiple times, to be well enough to be back in the chair. I am working on, it feels like a million different projects at once, but I am doing it in big chunks, according to my new schedule, which is just brilliant. Each day that I'm on, for example, today's Thursday, Talking Thursday, each day that I'm on, I always decide that it's my favorite until I get to the next day when I decide that that's my favorite. So I think that's a really, really great sign as to how things are going around here. I did finish the read for revision of the Quincy book, and I'm plunging tomorrow into starting to write a synopsis of it, which I will use to guide a revision eventually. And I did a bunch of work on this nonfiction book yesterday. Things are just going really well. Knock all the wood that is around. 90-day classes are going great, and my students are just kicking ass, and they're getting stuff done, and I'm really proud about them. Proud about them? Yes, I'm proud of them as well. How about you? Are you getting your work done? You are listening to this podcast because you are a writer. I know that. So if you're not getting any work done, try to get some done. Just a little bit. Crappy first drafts are what we make, people. That's what we do. They're not going to be good. I say this all the time because it takes a long time for this really, really to sink into people's brains. It took me being a professional full-time writer for years before it sunk into my brain. Oh, that my crappy first drafts, they were never going to be good. I was never going to finally get good enough to make a good first draft. It doesn't happen. Crappy first drafts are what we do, are what 99% of writers do. So write some crappy first draft words and then tell me about it. Okay, so we're going to go back to talking about Abigail Dean. This book is called Girl A, and I talked to her about the prologue, which I thought was fascinating. It's very short. It's one page, and I asked her permission to read this to you. And then we're going to talk about it in the interview, and you can see what she does with this. But oh, it's good. No spoilers. Again, this is just the first page prologue of the book. You don't know me, but you'll have seen my face. In the earlier pictures, they bludgeoned our features with pixels right down to our waists. Even our hair was too distinctive to disclose. But the story and its protectors grew weary, and in the danker corners of the internet, we became easy to find. The favored photograph was taken in front of the house on Moore Woods Road, early on a September evening. We had filed out and lined up, 6 of us in height order, and Noah in Ethan's arms, while Father arranged the composition. Little white wraiths squirming in the sunshine. Behind us, the house rested in the last of the day's light, shadows spreading from the windows and the door. We were still and looking at the camera. It should have been perfect. But just before Father pressed the button, Evie squeezed my hand and turned up her face toward me. In the photograph, she's just about to speak, and my smile is starting to curl. I don't remember what she said, but I'm quite sure that we paid for it later. Oh, okay. And then the next line, that's the prologue. The next line is, I arrived at the prison in the mid-afternoon. Tell me that you would not have to keep reading that. That prologue just knocked me out, and I wanted to talk to her about how she came up with it, what it meant to her, how she does this. It's one of those things that, I went back to kind of take apart. There's a sweetness to it, a childlike sweetness at the end when she's smiling at her sister. But there's also that foreboding sense of menace and dread that just hangs over it. I just think she is phenomenal. So let's leap into the podcast now, and you'll be able to hear me talk with Abigail Dean. And I think y'all should read Girl A. All right. I also think you all should be doing your own writing, which is why you're here, why you're listening. And I know that you can do it. I know it's hard, and I know that you can do it. All right. Happy writing. Well, I could not be more pleased to welcome to the show Abigail Dean. Hello, Abigail.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you so much for having me on as well.
I was just bending your ear with what I thought about your book, but I want to talk about it a lot more today. With a little intro here. Abigail, wow, I'm very excited. Abigail Dean works as a lawyer for Google, and before that was a bookseller. She lives in London and is working on her second novel. Girl A is her first novel, just out in the United States after a competitive international auction that saw the book sell in 25 territories. It's been optioned for TV rights for a limited series with Johan Renck, the Emmy winner from HBO's critical and commercial hit Chernobyl, attached to direct. So first of all, just wow, flipping wow. I loved your book, couldn't put it down at all. How are you feeling about all of this, like, sudden, critical, big attention just blowing up in your face? How does that feel?
So I'm probably just going to sound completely inarticulate because I don't know really how I feel. Like I think I'm still in a bit of a state of shock. And I think the shock is like 90% joyful and 10% terrified. I'd
Yeah.
say, I'd say. Like the best thing is the characters being out there in the world and people getting to know the characters. And as a reader, like over my life, I've had so many relationships with so many characters. You feel like I've loved them and I've detested them. And I think that hearing from readers that they have felt that way about the characters, that's the best feeling in the world.
Mm.
So yeah, kind of a lot of joy, and then I think inevitably a tiny bit of terror because there's some exposure, of
Yeah.
course, in terms of a small piece of your heart being out there is a strange feeling as well.
And Lex, the main character, is so perfectly drawn. And without any spoilers, I will say that at the 25% mark, after I was trying to figure it out as a writer, why did we just go from first person into this third person? Why am I here with this male character? And then Lex communicates with him at the very end of that scene and says hello, and I burst into tears at the 25% mark. Like, that doesn't I don't cry in books anyway. I just thought it was beautiful. It was beautiful. It was also such a dark book that dragged me through it. And I am a, psychological thriller junkie. I read them all. I've almost been feeling bored lately. I feel like I've seen all the angles, and yours was fresh and new and beautifully, absolutely beautifully written. The way that you write characters is stunning. But what I wanted to talk about real quickly first is, just before in the intro, I will have read the very short prologue to your book. Um, and I wanted to read it because I think it is an absolutely brilliant way of capturing the reader's attention and giving them just enough information to pique their interest in a way that it is absolutely impossible not to turn the next page, because we must know more. And this is a very technical question, and only the writers will be interested in it. But at what point did that scene arise, either being written or when you knew it was the start of the book?
It was there from the beginning. It was like the first scene written.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
I was sure you would say, like, no, that was impossible to come to. That's amazing.
Um, I think that the reason behind it was I am a true crime junkie. I'm like I've listened to the podcasts and I've watched the TV shows, and I think often in these cases there is this defining photograph or
Mm.
this defining image. And that's how you know the people who were involved in that instant. Like that's kind of what these, what human beings, I think, sometimes are almost like reduced to and compacted into, like these images that we kind of remember for years after. And I think in a way I wanted it to be like, so sometimes that's the end of the story, and that's all that's all you get.
Yeah.
um but in a way, so for Girl A, I wanted that to be the beginning of the story, and then everything that comes after, the rest of the novel is how the Gracie family, who are they really? This photo is such a, it's defining, but at the same time it's completely not defining it. It's
Yeah.
like the tiniest tip of this iceberg of what they've been through, and the people they've become, as well.
So, okay, I love all this. So for a debut novel, this did not read as a debut. It read as I feel like I am, cavelling and waxing rhapsodic even too much, but it read like a masterpiece in thriller. Where is your writing history? I know you're a lawyer, which is all writing, and there are so many lawyers who then move into writing or the other way. Is that part of it, or where else do you come from in writing?
So I think it's I've been writing a lot since I was really little, like really, really little. And my mum has recently unearthed like some fantastic, like, 2 pages of A4 stapled together as like, this is my serious novel, and I'm 6.
How
Everyone
cute.
has to read it. Yeah, it's like, thanks, mum. That's just what I just what I always wanted. Um, and I filled notebooks, with various stories, and a lot of them were dark as well. I think, at a pretty early age, I was sort of often writing. Once it was the soft toys, they sometimes had a bad time, and then it was like the Barbies, and they had a pretty bad time, as well. And as a teenager, I also wrote a lot of fan fiction. Um, Huge amounts of fan fiction.
That'll do it. That's such a good training ground, I think.
Yeah, it's one of those strange things, isn't it? And I don't know if it's because it's something that, teenage girls often do, and sometimes people are like, well, teenage girls, what do they know? Fan fiction seems to sometimes have a really bad reputation, but it's an awesome way of writing.
Yeah.
And I can't think of a, as a writer as well, I think I can't think of a greater compliment in a way than people wanting to make your characters their
Yes.
own,
What
in a
was your
particular way.
what was your favorite fandom that you were writing in, if you don't mind sharing?
No, that's okay. I am so I was a big gamer, and I wrote a lot of like Final Fantasy 7 and 8 was my like fandom at the
That's
time. And I
amazing.
still stick they were still great. They are still great stories and incredibly inspiring stories that, I still like look back and I'm like, incredible inspiration.
Oh, I just absolutely love that. Okay, so you're busy, you're a lawyer. How do you get the writing done? Where does this fit into your life?
So for Girl A, I took some time off,
Mm.
to start writing. It had been a case that in my 20s, I basically just worked, for at least sort of 6, 7 years, of that time, and I kind of didn't write at all. I was doing like lawyer writing, so I was writing
Yeah.
contracts and writing emails, many emails. But I kind of let writing slip away a little. And I was sort of coming up to my 30th birthday and was like, why have you kind of abandoned this thing that you absolutely loved, this long standing ambition, and yeah, but more than ambition, I think really just the thing that, was probably for me the most satisfying thing that I can do. Um, so yeah, I decided to sort of shake things up a bit, and I left my job at a law firm, which had incredibly demanding hours, lots of travel time, and spent 3 months basically just sitting in my local library, and starting to write Girl A.
So
And
it wasn't even a sabbatical. You quit to do this?
yeah, I quit.
Wow. How did that
I had
feel?
So I want to be totally frank. I'm a risk averse lawyer standard, and I had another job lined up at the end
Ah,
of the 3 months. So I
perfect.
didn't kind of quit without anything waiting. But it felt even just having 3 months where you're unpaid and you're like, okay, I'm gonna see how this goes. I sort of made a bit of a deal with myself that if I was gonna do it, I had to actually write. Like I have as much temptation as anyone to lie in bed and read and then watch Netflix. And I was like, okay, you're taking 3 months off. You have to actually show up every day. It doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to write X number of words a day, but you do need to show up and try. And that was the deal for that
Did you get
period.
most of the book done in that 3 months, or was that the start of it?
It was the start. I had really grand ideas. I saw myself like just getting this first draft, just just getting it out in 3 months, and yeah, that did not happen. I got about maybe a third to a half of the way there, and then it was another 9 months of evenings and weekends and just finding time wherever I could. Like I'm a big I think a lot of the time I'd been quite precious about how I wrote, and I think one of the reasons I didn't write in my 20s was I had ideas that I needed to be sitting in silence with, like, writing by hand, have like hours of time. And a lot of Girl A was written, I wrote on the notes section of my phone. I wrote, sometimes by hand, sometimes with a laptop, like whatever was easiest. And I think I kind of had to let go of those notions that the muse was going to like come and find me in my in my
Yeah.
bedroom, because yeah, it didn't. And some scenes were difficult and challenging. I didn't want to write them, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was a much more mundane exercise than I had allowed myself previously to think.
That is such a deep comment, and I want listeners to really hear that. Writing is just work a day so much of the time. Even when we're very excited, we show up and we do the work. We kind of touched on this when we were chatting before, but how so you're writing dark stuff, and I love writing dark stuff, and I just want to know, how much do you have to do of self-care when you're writing this? Because I sometimes worry about myself that I don't need to do very much. Like even writing and thinking about dark stuff kind of lights me up, and I'm a really positive, well lit soul probably. But as I was telling you, I told my wife the idea for this new book, and she was like, I don't know if I can live with a person who just thought of that idea. And I'm like, this is the best. I'm so excited. How do you handle writing that darkness and being in the world?
I think there is definitely a big contrast between my writing and my personality. Kind of as you exactly as you sort of said, Rachel. I think my husband would read some chapters of Girl A, and he was kind of like, I sometimes, where does this come from?
Are you okay? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, slightly. And I think if me, it's fiction. Um I think that I I do have to be a little careful at times. I think especially I write often quite late into the evening. It's kind of one of the
Mhm.
times I actually really like to write. And I kind of had to stop doing that a bit.
Mm.
It
Mhm.
was a case that, you go to sleep and I think the characters are sometimes still there, or they're even worse, maybe they're kind of where you left them.
Yeah.
And that was a strange, and that was a surprise to me. I was actually like, oh, maybe this is affecting you. And obviously there's the constant reminder, I think, that this is something that happens to people.
Yes.
And you know that, I think, is something that you need to be incredibly sensitive about writing. I certainly found, and really kind of do consider the gravity of that, I think, in a way, as well.
I love how and again, no spoilers, but we're dealing with Lex's basically mental health. And in most ways, not always, but in most ways, she's come out this very, very strong, beautiful person with a support system that is also beautiful. And I really love that. I found a lot of inspiration in that. What is your biggest challenge when it comes to writing?
I think my biggest challenge is it probably is the showing up and the
Mm,
finding time. Um, I think that, for Girly, I had just this luxury of that
yeah.
period off. And I think that after that, there is always the temptation of doing other things. And I think especially sometimes, when being fortunate enough to be published, in a way, sometimes that means there's even more distractions. It's
Oh,
fantastic
yeah.
to connect with readers on social media, and especially at this time, like, that's such a joy. And um I think that all of those things, though, I know the way I try to sort of overcome that weakness and that challenge is very little is ever as satisfying as just a really good day of writing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
you know, all the kind of feedback and reviews in the world are very unlikely to ever be as satisfying as when you're like, yes, like, you look back the next day and you're like, that was a really good day. Like, I'm happy with those paragraphs. And I try to cling to that a bit. Yeah,
How
and
how
get my
is
desk.
how is the writing of the second book going? Because I really struggled with my second novel. How are you having second book blues, or is it just going well?
It's gone, in different. It's gone very differently at different times over the last year. I would say. Uh, At present, it's going pretty well, and I feel like I'm getting there. Things are kind of really moving into place. I'm sort of getting that. For me, I think, it needs to be an obsession in
Yeah.
some ways. That I need to be thinking about the characters when I'm out for a walk, or when I'm, like, unstacking the dishwasher. They're kind of. I'm thinking of them and trying to sort of think what they'll do next, and think about the conversations that they're going to have. And it took a while with this with this novel to get to that stage. I think it took a while for the obsession to set in. I think I was maybe a bit stuck with the Gracie family and with Girl
Yeah.
A.
Yeah.
And I think now I'm there, and that feels really, really good. Like, they're my obsession now, rather than Lex and her story.
Oh, good. Well, and what's really nice is that now the rest of the world has this obsession with Lex, and it just we're recording on February 4th, and it just released in the US, I think 2 days ago, right?
Yeah, that's
I'm
right.
I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to this one climbing the charts. I really, really am. So, no, I mean, not to make anything more intense, but I can see this rocketing to the top. Talking about writing, can you share a craft tip with us that you use in your writing?
Um, yes, yeah, I think I can. So I think I said before about kind of using notes on my phone
Yeah.
um, as a sort of way that I write. And I kind of do that very, very sort of consistently.
Hmm.
So I sort of try to use I think I try to use kind of my phone in terms of it being something I have to hand, as a way of kind of planning writing. So I write, and I promise this is not a promotion. I always feel very guilty saying this. I write on Google Docs. This is not a promotion.
That's right,
Um,
of course.
and something I find really useful is having the manuscript in one Google Docs file. And as I sort of think of different things, different points that need to happen later in the manuscript, I just drop them in to the bottom of the file. And sort of, in a way, I find that by doing that, the plan almost shapes itself.
Yeah.
So you have kind of everything you've actually written so far, and then underneath it you have future kind of snippets of dialogue, and you have a kind of vague plan of the plot. And I think it just means that as you get to future scenes, you find that you've got kind of little guiding beacons, I guess, in a way, that you've added in the past. I find it's a way a way of planning that doesn't feel like planning. It still feels like it has an imaginative
Yeah.
side to it. And yeah, it just means I feel you never come into a scene completely blind or clueless, because you might have already left yourself little little assists, I guess, to help guide the way.
And you're never alone on the page. There's always something below you to kind of catch you almost. I would love to ask a
Exactly.
direct question about something you're so good at and that I really struggle with, which is character description. You have a way of, I really believe that when we're describing characters who may not be the most important characters in the book, the best way to do it is with a sentence or two that are extremely explicitly clear and visual, and then leave them alone for the rest of the book. And you do it so beautifully. There was one where I think the person was just described as looking round and damp, with round and damp hands and a round and damp body. And it was so good. Is this something you consciously think of, or is this something that just comes out of your fingers?
I think it is something that I think of quite a bit. Yeah, it's there is an amazing book that I've certainly found really, really useful, which is called How Fiction Works by James Woods,
Oh, I don't know that
who
one.
I think is a critic for I think he's a critic for the New York Times, I want to say, but I might
Yeah.
have that wrong. Um, I found that incredibly, it just has some fantastic little insights into sort of describing characters, and it's one of the sort of, I don't tend to, I try not to read too many kind of books about writing because I feel
Yeah.
they can kind of often throw you slightly off course, but this is one that I kind of, I read probably for the first time like in my late teens, and I've kind of kept returning to it. But another thing I would say that I found really useful for kind of character descriptions, is actually songs, um, and
Really?
song lyrics. Yeah, I think it's a case that, you know, in a song you maybe have like, what I mean, like in terms of word count, you probably
Yeah.
have, you know, you're down, you maybe in the tens. I'm not
Yeah.
sure, maybe a little more, early hundreds. And there are some artists though who I think so vividly draw characters
That's so good.
in their lyrics, you know, that you really get an impression, you know, as to who this character is, and you're like, you know, the artist has done that in like, you know, seconds.
Yeah.
And I found that really, really um, useful, especially what one of my, and just to give an example, I think um, Craig Finn, who writes the Hold Steady,
Yeah.
so, you know, and as an independent artist too, he is someone whose songwriting I kind of go back to again and again in terms of how he draws these characters, this whole cast of characters on an album in the space of like a few lines.
Yeah.
So there's a few things I try to look to in terms of character descriptions, and just, yeah, to sort of study how other people have done it and how to shape my characters that way.
Well, if it gives you any pleasure to know, I always underline and highlight in my Kindle the lines that then I can go back and study, and there are a bunch in your book. But I was like, how did
Thank
she
you,
do
Rachel.
that? That's amazing. Okay, so what thing in your life affects your writing in a surprising way?
Um, there's a few things I think. One has been actually, I'd say, the support of my partner.
Mm,
He, you know, I've known him, obviously, well, I've known him for a while now, and he, you know, I think, you know, he's not actually somebody who is particularly kind of interested in writing or at all. Like he's a big reader, but, you know, doesn't write himself. And it was really his sort of encouragement towards the end of my 20s that did make me think, you know, maybe this is something that I should go back to. We'd known each other for quite a few years at that point, and I'd always said, you know, I'd love to be a writer. You know, I love writing. It'd be fantastic to be a writer. And he sort of said to me, well, he is very kind of blunt, and said, you know, Abby, you're probably not going to be a writer if you don't write anything. And
that's a
it
good
was one of
man.
it was one of those moments that, you know, it was actually sort of epiphany moment
Yeah.
slightly, because it was very close to the bone. But I thought, you know what, that is, and it's still, I think, the piece of advice that I keep going back to, as well. So yeah, that, and it was I think it just also came as a surprise because it was one of those things that at the time it didn't necessarily feel so supportive. It felt quite kind of a bit of a sting to it,
Oh,
but you
absolutely.
know, I think it was deeply very, very supportive, and a very kind of there was a kindness to him saying that.
That is beautiful. I love that. Do you have a hard stop at the top of the hour, or can we go a couple minutes over?
We can go over. Yeah, I've
Okay,
not got
great.
a hard
Uh,
stop.
Okay. Then I'll ask you the next couple of questions. Well, actually, I guess there's just one left. Before we talk about your book, what is the best book you've read recently? I know what mine is.
Oh, it's tough, isn't it? um,
No, no,
so
mine is not tough. The best book that I've read recently was yours. So,
Um, so most recently, and the one I loved was "Ask Again, Yes" by Mary Beth Keane.
hmm.
I
Oh, I
read
love.
that
Yeah.
a month or so ago, and it was just one of those, books that I found really, really moving. It's not told in a particularly kind of emotional way, but I think it's really a story about mental health, and about mental health at a time when it was not really understood or acknowledged. And I think what's quite frightening is that time was not that long ago either. I think we're
Hmm.
talking kind of, this was novel set in begins at least in the 70s, I think. Um, and yeah, just a really, really beautiful exploration of that and how it affects two particular families in upstate New York. And it's also a novel that I hugely admire in terms of it deals with a really long time period. Sometimes years are told in the course of a few paragraphs, but it still manages to be really specific and really moving
Mm.
in spite of that. And that's something that I kind of really admired.
Oh, thank you very much. I wrote that down going to the top of my TBR pile. That is always a selfish question that I ask on my part. And now, can you tell us what is your elevator pitch for Girl A for the people who don't know what we've been talking about?
Sure. Girl A is Lex Gracie. And as a child, Lex manages to escape from her family home, which becomes known over time as the House of Horrors in the press. And as she escapes, she manages to free her six brothers and sisters and exposes her parents' crimes, which had been committed as part of a kind of religious cult governed by her father. And Girl A opens sort of 15 years after that escape. By that time, Lex is a successful attorney, like she's living in New York, and she really lives independently of her past. She does everything she can to avoid thinking about it. And that is until her mother dies in prison. And when she does, she leaves Lex and her siblings, their family home, the House of Horrors, where they grew up, and forces Lex, as the executor, the administrator of this will, to return to the UK, to reconnect with her siblings, in order to decide the fate of the house, and to try to turn the house into a force for good.
The way that you draw the relationships between Lex and her siblings is marvelous. I at the beginning of the book, I love talking to writers transparently about this stuff. At the beginning of the book, there were a lot of names, Ethan and Noah. And I was like, how am I going to keep these names apart? And you worry about that as a reader moving forward. And they're all so unique and drawn so vividly. And each such a very real relationship between all of them. It's just beautiful. I cannot say enough about your book. This is going to be the one I recommend to everyone who loves thriller. People who love thrillers, who love a certain genre. We have, the list in our phone of our best friends who only read the great stuff. And I've already emailed, I've texted all of them. Just go buy it.
Rachel, thank you. Thank you so much. That does just mean the world to me. Like, that I think having like people talking about the book and recommending it to their friends is
Yeah,
that's the dream.
it
Like, it's beyond the
is.
dream.
It is. And I'm so glad you're living the dream. I am going to be following your career with incredible interest, and I can't wait to buy the second book. So thank you for
Thank
being on
you.
the show today. I really appreciate your time and your book.
It was wonderful to be here. And yeah, thank you to you, and thank you to everyone who's listening as well.
Thank you. Bye.